So, John, I have a question to you as somebody who's from Oakland, who was born, bred Oakland. Where did the black people go?
Well, that's a damn good question. So you got to remember, When I grew up in Oakland, the black people were, for the most part, in West Oakland. That there were places in East Oakland where you black people couldn't buy houses or they wouldn't rent to you. So for me, it never occurred to me that. Now the time I'll tell you the time that it showed up for me was I go down to Raimondi and they practice at Raimondi Park, which is a place I grew up deep in the heart of West Oakland, and I grew up and played baseball there and football there and all that sort of stuff. So I'm there with my grandson. And so I remember this one night. I'm on the inside. Now you have to know where Raimondi is. I'm on the inside of this, running around this fence, and suddenly I saw these two white women running on the outside, and I stopped and said, "Damn, I don't remember ever seeing two white women running in," and this is about 7 o'clock at night. Wasn't in springtime. This was in the fall, right? So it's dark. Got two white women running in West Oakland around Raimondi Park in West Oakland. Damn, something has changed. In the last 40 years I've been doing work in Oakland, the demographics have shifted really dramatically, and services to service that demographic has shifted dramatically. When you step back and just look at Carter Harley Hale doesn't exist anymore. I mean, Carter Harley Hale was one of the big major department stores. Those stores aren't in business anymore. One of the ways you produce low-income housing, where do you get the money to finance new projects? It's investment tax credits. You have to have enough capital willing to invest in tying up assets, getting them entitled, and how the financing and how the money flows. That's really the driver of that impacts supply, probably more than anything else. Inside our own black community, we have our own squabbles that flow into the political front.
Taken. You cannot decide whether or not you want to do this. I will be the council member who wants to step in, and I will make sure that this is served.
Clarification will be provided in writing at another time. The President Pro Tem will be here next week.
I would like to hear from the city attorney what the rule is.
We are not going to hear from the city attorney at this time.
We need to hear from the city attorney.
I would like to make a motion.
K-Top, if you will please turn off the mic, the podium mic.
And frankly, in my judgment, it weakens whatever position that we think we might have. If we're dealing with political or development or whatever the case may be. And I think that being more supportive of each other as we go through this process would produce a better result if we're focused specifically on the black community. Now the challenge for real estate projects is the market is bigger than just the black community, and so you have to be able to build a product that can sustain itself inside the market element as well as addressing itself to the needs of the black community.
The president's promise to cut corporate tax rates is reducing private investment in affordable housing development.
Have many people that have jobs, but they're low-wage jobs. I have a lot of people that come to me who are on, SSI, disability, CalWORKS, public assistance. So I see the full gamut. I also see middle-class people. I see people like myself who are coming in and needing help, who are being displaced, who can't afford to live in the city that they grew up in. I had a case last year. I had a young African-American man. He was a UC Berkeley student, and he had 2 or 3 other black American roommates, and they were not able to get housed because of their color. When they went to an attorney, the attorney just felt like we just don't have enough here. We just, even though our agency actually did some testing where, you know, the white person that called got a call back and the black person didn't get a call back. This was a young man who was, you know, in school doing the right thing, you know, working productive, and he was having a hard time finding housing because of his skin color. It's like, wow, no matter how successful you are, doing all the right things you're supposed to be doing in school, you know, keeping your nose clean, so to say, and you still are barred from just an essential need of being able to get housing. The problem I see is the displacement once again, you know, and also, you know, a few years back we had a real problem with predatory lending, and so you had African Americans that had spent generations in places like West Oakland and had, you know, beautiful homes and equity in those homes, and they got really bad loans and they ended up losing their homes. And so that was a real problem. It still happens, I know, today, but I remember just several years ago it was a big issue that was on the radar. So when you have predatory lending practices that strips the wealth out of people's homes, it affects the whole household. Like you were saying, you have, you know, a grandma and you have a, you know, a daughter, grown daughter, son, and children. It affects everyone, and their whole ability to build wealth is just stripped away. And they went from being a homeowner to being a tenant, and you are very vulnerable as a tenant because the landlord can raise your rent, can tell you to move, and there are people who certainly did move out of the area. So the federal government has a program called Section 8, and in that program, people who are so fortunate to get the Section 8 voucher, they pay only 30% of their income on rent. So the problem that we're seeing now is the housing market in Oakland is so hot, and many landlords will not take these vouchers because the vouchers have a limit as to how much landlord can charge for rent. So they say, well, I'm not going to go to this voucher program. I'm going to get my higher end tenant who can pay me, you know, much more than you can. So what's happening, people have these wonderful vouchers, but they're just useless because they can't use them and people don't take them. I have had many landlords tell me, I will not rent to a Section 8 person because they will not take care of my property. So there is this perception that people in Section 8 who are low income, who tend to be people of color, older people, people with disabilities, they're not gonna take good care of the property. They don't care. They're just, you know, they're living off the government. They don't care about the property. So there's all these stereotypes that are really ugly, and that's also a barrier too when people have this sense that you're not gonna be a good tenant, you know, because of your class or that you have a voucher. It's a real issue. And the thing is that Section 8 is not a protected class. So an owner can say, I don't want to take Section 8. It's not part of any kind of fair housing law.
Average market rent for a one-bedroom apartment, $2,300 per month. Median income of a black household, $2,700 per month.
African Americans were welcomed here during the Second World War. That's when San Francisco, Oakland opened to African Americans, as was the case in New York and Detroit and a number of other cities. And what we didn't realize then was that we were at the end of the job queue for industrial labor forces. And by the 1950s, these industries were starting to decline. So what happened was that the white working force that was ahead of African Americans, had more seniority, moved out of the cities with these industries. Blacks could not follow their white labor peers into the suburbs because of racial discrimination. There were covenants that kept African Americans from buying property in these new suburbs, and these properties were paid for by the federal government. The new home mortgage systems were all available to white working class people who took well advantage of it. They had the GI Bill as well, and they were able to move into the suburbs, create new communities in the suburbs closer to the new manufacturing centers, and in the process left African Americans behind in large cities without the industrial base to support the population. In East and West Oakland, you have one of the highest rates of home ownership in the country. Okay, so you had people who managed to invest and to get their properties and to establish well-established communities. Now, what happened when you have industry pulls out of a city and leaves a population there without the opportunity for work, you then have census tracts, actually blocks, in West and East Oakland that had 50% unemployment rates by 1960. It didn't improve by 70, 80, and 90. So what happened is you had a large portion of communities, not all, not everyone, but you had enough people in communities without any viable way of supporting themselves that they were then open to whatever way they could. The overlooked significance of the Panther Party is that they held back the drug tide. When they were operating, they would not allow drug dealers and drugs to become a new economy in East or West Oakland. We couldn't understand for years, why are drugs confined to black communities? Because black people have less money than anyone else. So if you're going to make money on drugs, why would it be with the poorest community? Well, it wasn't because it was for black trafficking. It was a way of getting drugs out into suburban communities and then keeping the police heat and the whole identity of drugs on black communities and never seeing that it was going out. I was able to map primary drug, crack cocaine trafficking locations in East Oakland. And it turned out that all of them were within 5 blocks of freeway exits and entrances. Well, think about this. If you live in East and West Oakland, why was it necessary to stand on the street corner and sell drugs? If your primary traffic were people who live in the community, they don't need to stand on the street corner. You can do it from one another's homes, for that matter. I have actually tracked and mapped the extent to which drugs became predominant on various blocks in Harlem and in East Oakland. And at what point does that block no longer become livable? The untold story is that many of these blocks held out, they resisted, they in fact had a pitched war against these elements. And a number of them won, but then a number of them failed. And that is whenever a block gets to a point where it becomes uninhabitable or you no longer control it, you're out of there. So then what happens is that anyone who gets a good job in some of these blocks, first thing they do is, what do? They leave the community. You see the population softening from the 1970s to the 80s to the 90s. You start to see the population going down, down, down. And we didn't call it gentrification then, but it was going down. And when it got low enough, when basically the social backbone of the community was broken and in effect was wiped out, then it created these spaces, in effect whole blocks of buildings where their value was so low that anyone with any imagination would say, well, my God, why should I pay $600,000 or $700,000 to live out in the suburbs when I can buy a old Victorian in West Oakland or in San Francisco for $150,000, $200,000. One of the things we don't look at in gentrification is that the black people and poor people who are being displaced from the city don't disappear. They don't fall off the face of the earth or it didn't get gobbled up or something. The question is, where do they go? And it's very clear they're going way, 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 way out. Fresno, Tracy, Stockton, and Antioch, Pittsburgh, Hercules, Vallejo. Same for New York. They're being pushed way out in New Jersey, into the Oranges, up to Rockland County, up to Westchester County, out onto the island, and so forth. So, they're there. So what we're seeing is the displacement of people from the inner city, but now the formation of, if you will, new ghettos in the suburban communities.
My grandma has stayed in the same house my whole life, like since before I was born. Other than that, because a lot of homes be single parent homes too, so we do, like, sometimes you would hope they'd upgrade, but they began upgrade. You have, like, like my mom, we living together, but she just got a boyfriend and not a husband. And he living with her, so we live with him, or they came together, and they break up, which is probably likely. We own again, move. Anywhere over the Bay Area, like, has always, like, moved around. Like, has always had to go to several different, like elementary schools. Like, think about that. Like, you go to, like, 2 or 3 different elementary schools. And I was like a whole different, not just setting, but seat, like a whole different type of individual. And life happens in relationships. We migrating from relationship to relationship, migrating from spot to spot with no man. And when I think about it in my head, it's like, as far back as my memories go, for I probably couldn't remember the address, but I know it's like we've always moved. My grandma, my mom, we've always moved.
We have the highest percentage of men being killed by police. And we have the highest percentage of income spent on consumer goods. How much money do we spend on consumer goods a year? Anybody know? 1.1 is estimated, $1.1 trillion. That's the socio-economic backdrop to understand why black home ownership matters, because it stabilizes our neighborhoods and puts us back in position to start moving forward and recapture who we really are. That's why black home ownership matters. You get to grow up in one place and develop lifelong friends who can hold you accountable. You get to learn how to respect the people in the neighborhood and the elders again. You get to start and support black businesses and neighborhood businesses, and we get to hire our kids. That sort of stuff. That's what home ownership, the loss of home ownership has created a transient community. Starting in April 2008, they charged people with lower FICO scores more money for the same loan. It wasn't that reason before. Fannie and Freddie were in a little trouble, so they needed to make more money. Well, they made more money. They made $187 billion that they paid back that they borrowed. They contributed another $54 to $60 billion to the Treasury. They're not in trouble no more. But remember, we systemically have more socioeconomic issues, so we got lower FICO scores. Their floor to get a Fannie Mae loan is 620. So it didn't used to have a higher price. That's unfair. It's disparate. It has a disparate impact on lower income people. And the lower money you put down, the lower your FICO score, even though it's approvable, the more you pay. That's not fair. Remember the shadow inventory? Remember that? That all 3 million houses gotta come to the market never showed up. It never showed up, right? Well, they're selling them out the back door as NPL sales, non-performing loan sales. It means that if I announce a bulk sale of $1.4 billion of properties all across the country, the only people who have the wherewithal to buy them are sitting on Wall Street. The same people who made the money on the front end are making the money again on the back end, and the negative impact in our community is there is no inventory, so we need to change the process for bulk sales.
Government-sponsored enterprise Fannie Mae provided a taxpayer-backed loan guarantee to private equity firm Blackstone Group for the stock market launch of its single-family rental subsidiary. Fannie Mae's involvement is a sign that it believes home ownership will remain out of reach for many Americans, and that Wall Street's housing wager will become a long-term business, not just an opportunistic trade made after the foreclosure crisis. These investors do not expand the affordable housing stock. Rather, in this limited market, they drive up the price of rents and remove affordable inventory from the hands of American homeowners.